Lonely silence hung over the vast Texas ranch where the sun painted the earth in strokes of gold and rust. The ranch was enormous, stretching beyond the horizon, but its heart was empty. For years, Daniel Carter, the rancher who once dreamed of building a family under the wide sky, lived in solitude, his only companions the cattle, the horses, and the ghosts of his unfulfilled dreams. Life had carved deep lines on his face, but beneath the ruggedness, his eyes held a yearning, a longing that no amount of land, money, or livestock could ever soothe. He wanted a family, a reason to come home to something warmer than silence. Yet fate, cruel in its unpredictability, had taken away his wife early, leaving him to bear both the ranch and loneliness. In a nearby town, a woman named Amina lived a different tragedy. Married at a young age to a man whose pride was larger than his heart, she had carried 3 pregnancies with hope. Each time, she prayed for acceptance, for joy, for love. But each time she gave birth to daughters, 3 little angels with tiny hands and innocent laughter, the man who called himself her husband grew colder, harsher, and crueler. He believed sons were a mark of strength and daughters a burden. Instead of cherishing his family, he punished Amina for something never in her control. Bruises covered her skin, and silence became her armor. Yet, despite her suffering, she loved her daughters fiercely. She carried their fragile bodies against her chest and whispered promises that one day, somehow, she would protect them. One stormy evening, Daniel rode into town to buy supplies. He wasn't looking for company, wasn't looking for change, only flour, some tools, and medicine for his horses. But destiny often hides behind ordinary days. At the corner of the dusty street, outside the general store, he saw her. Amina stood quietly, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin frame, trying to soothe her youngest child while the older 2 clung to her dress. Her eyes were downcast, but they betrayed fear and exhaustion. Daniel noticed the fading bruises along her cheek, the way she flinched when a man walked past her too quickly, and the way her children pressed themselves against her as though shielding her from the world. Something stirred in him. He asked around quietly, and the townsfolk whispered the story. They spoke of her husband's cruelty, of how he blamed her for bringing only girls into the world, of how he raised his hand against her without shame. Daniel clenched his fists. He had seen animals treated better than this woman and her children. That night, as the lanterns flickered in his cabin, he could not sleep. Her eyes haunted him, the silent cry for help, the strength hidden behind layers of pain. The next morning, Daniel made a decision that would change both their lives. He saddled his horse, rode into town, and knocked on her door. Her husband wasn't home, but Amina answered, startled to see the tall rancher standing there. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. "You're coming with me." For a moment, she froze, unsure whether to feel fear or relief. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not with authority alone, but with a strange undertone of protection. He didn't wait for debate. "Pack what you need. The girls too. You don't belong here anymore." Amina's heart pounded. Could she trust him? Could she walk away from the only place she had known, even if it had been a prison? But then her eldest daughter tugged her hand and whispered, "Mama, can we go?" That small voice broke her hesitation. With trembling hands, she gathered a small bundle of clothes and carried her baby close to her chest. For the first time in years, she stepped outside not as a prisoner, but as a woman on the edge of freedom. The journey to the ranch was quiet at first. The girls clung to their mother, stealing glances at Daniel, who rode beside them with an unspoken promise of safety. When they reached his land, the vastness of it left Amina breathless. There was no shouting husband, no suffocating walls, only open skies, fields that stretched forever, and a silence that didn't hurt. For the girls, it was like stepping into a dream. At the ranch, Daniel gave them a small cottage near his main house, a place filled with warmth and light. The first nights were difficult. Amina would wake up in fear, expecting her husband's rage, only to find calm. The girls too would sometimes cry in the dark, unsure if they were safe. But Daniel was patient. He repaired broken chairs with his own hands, cooked meals clumsily until Amina began to help, and let the girls ride his horses, their laughter echoing across the fields. Slowly, the bruises faded, not just from Amina's skin, but from her spirit. Time became their healer. Amina, once a shadow of herself, began to find strength again. She worked the garden, sewed little dresses for her daughters, and even smiled when Daniel teased the children gently. Daniel, in turn, found life in their presence. The ranch that had once been silent now buzzed with laughter, small footsteps, and the smell of warm bread from the kitchen. He watched Amina with respect, never forcing closeness but always offering support. He saw the way she carried herself now, with dignity, with resilience, and admired her not as a broken woman, but as someone who had survived storms. But the past was not ready to let go. One evening, Amina's husband rode up to the ranch, furious. He demanded she return, claiming she was his wife and the children were his property. The air grew tense. Amina trembled, her daughters hiding behind her. But before the man could take another step, Daniel stood between them. His voice was calm but unshakable. She's not going anywhere. Not you, not anyone, will hurt her again. The husband spat insults, but Daniel's hand rested on his holster, a silent warning. In that moment, Amina realized something. She was no longer alone. She was no longer voiceless. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward and said firmly, "I will not return to you. My daughters deserve better, and so do I." The man, seeing the fire in her eyes and the steel in Daniel's stance, finally turned and left, his pride wounded but powerless against their resolve. That night, for the first time in years, Amina slept peacefully. She knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but she also knew she had found a safe haven. Daniel never pushed her into love, never demanded anything in return. But as the days turned into months, something deeper grew between them. She saw in him not just a protector, but a man of honor, patience, and quiet kindness. He saw in her not just a woman broken by cruelty, but a mother of courage, a woman of strength. The girls came to call him Uncle Daniel at first, their laughter filling the ranch like music. But with time, they began to see him as something more, a father who taught them to ride, who braided their hair with clumsy fingers, who sat by the fire listening to their stories. And Amina, her heart once wrapped in fear, began to allow herself to hope again. The ranch, once a symbol of loneliness, had become a home. And Daniel, once a solitary rancher, found his family not through blood, but through love. Under the endless skies, where the stars watched silently, Amina and Daniel built a new life, one not defined by the cruelty of the past, but by the promise of tomorrow. The bruises healed, the fear faded, and in their place grew strength, love, and the kind of happiness that only comes when broken souls finally find each other.